So as everybody knows, our union represents members across prison, adult, FE and HE. And I think it is fair to say that there is a crisis in every sector that we represent, and different challenges across every nation of the UK where we represent members. Never have we faced so many different but interlinked crises across every sector and across every nation. Never have we had such a demand on every piece of resource in the organisation across every nation and across every department. And I think it's really important to underline that, because I think much like you in the institutions where you work, know the pressures of increased workloads, know how dangerous and detrimental that can be to staff if not managed sympathetically and with compassion. You know, we are having the exact same issues here. You know, we're back in a situation now, as I'm sure is the case for many of you, where schools are going into lockdown and staff are yet again having to homeschool or care for their children, whilst also trying to help fight back against a crisis in the sector that they represent for members. And I really just wanted to start by laying that out quite starkly, because this will be an ongoing challenge as long as we're in the middle of this pandemic. Things are not going to get easier for us, as they aren't getting easier for you in your branches and institutions. And I really echo what the President said in her intro, that it's really important that we acknowledge that we're all coming together to help support members best protect themselves, and really launch the national campaigns that we need to fight back, but that we're all doing this under incredibly stressful circumstances. We're all running on whatever adrenaline we have left, and we all probably need some space that isn't going to be presenting itself anytime soon. So I just want to sort of say thank you to the staff, because I know they're working incredibly hard, but also just to sort of make everybody mindful of that, particularly as we may end up in what is beginning to look like a very disastrous second wave. So with that said, I will now turn my attention to the report. As has already been noted, there's we've broken this down into, I think it's 8 substantive parts. Yeah, 8, and I'm going to run through all but one of them, and then we can pick up the levy after the break. So you will have no doubt seen a huge focus of our campaigning has been on health and safety, particularly in recent weeks and months, as we've been returning to colleges and to universities. And we're also in negotiations for prison members about what a return for those who haven't been will look like as well. Obviously, the 5 tests that were published in May and June have been monitored, were key in FE in feeding into risk assessments that our regional and national officials spent the summer getting in place, and have been key in HE as well. But as I say, particularly in FE and addressing those concerns, and that was a huge amount of work that we were involved in over the summer. But the risk assessments on the ground don't really change the fact that we have a basic political problem, and we have it in all areas of the UK, not just in England. But obviously we'll all have seen recently Boris Johnson pledging his commitment to keep businesses, schools, colleges and universities open, even in a period where there's been recommendations that everybody else should work from home where possible, and even where we know that the highest spike in infections is amongst the traditional student age cohort. So a lot of our campaigning has been around ensuring that those who are back in colleges, that the risk assessments are being adhered to, and that we're on top of that where they're not. And then in HE, obviously anybody who works there will have seen the absolute awful and pretty disgraceful conditions that we've seen students exposed to, not just in England, though it's fair to say that Manchester Met and now Manchester have made national headlines, but we've seen similar in Scotland and in Edinburgh, the same sort of discussions of students sort of locked in pretty disgraceful conditions. So we've been working a lot behind the scenes with Independent Sage, with government across the 4 nations, and we're really trying to pick apart and discredit the government's dogmatic approach to keeping face-to-face teaching at all costs. I actually think we've done a really impressive job on this. All of the press teams across all of the nations, I think, have done an excellent job at really stating our case. Whenever I've seen any branch executive members being interviewed, particularly Liverpool, I think I saw Anthony on the news, everybody's doing an excellent job. And there really isn't much of a pushback in the interviews that we've been doing. I think the really strong political campaigning that we've been doing all year is really paying dividends now. And if you watched any of the debates that happened on Wednesday this week, UCU was name-checked a lot in the House of Commons, both by the Tory and the opposition benches. And I think a lot of that hard campaigning that we did and all of the letter writing that I know people were involved in may have seen at the time that it wasn't necessarily doing much, but I think we've generated a lot of support. This week I was invited to give a presentation to the Socialist Campaign Group, which is if you don't know, a long-standing campaign group of MPs within Labour. So Jeremy Corbyn was on the call, John McDonnell was on the call, Diane Abbott, and they obviously link up with other MPs around the UK and with their counterparts in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So there is a lot going on in the background. You can see from the report that we've been doing a lot of engagements, both with the Department of Education across the nations, Vice Chancellors and Prime Ministers, or the Prime Minister rather. So there's a lot going on in terms of lobbying. And as I say, what we've been trying to ensure, as there's been a divergence on some issues across the nations, that our staff in the devolved national offices have been tailoring an approach that's mindful of that. It was really disappointing, actually, to see that Scotland in particular removed important guidance from the draft to it being published about people working from home, because we were hoping, as we do sometimes, to actually either use what happened in Scotland or what was happening in Wales to put extra pressure on the Westminster government. So it was particularly disappointing actually to see the First Minister in Scotland roll back on that. You'll have seen that we had TUC and included some fringe events, really successful fringe event in my opinion. We've been doing some great work with the NUS, who remain really closely aligned to our position. I don't see it as a zero-sum game just for this campaign. I think it's really important that they know that we are there with them, kind of whatever the issue is, because obviously they're very good at campaigning themselves. So I probably won't say much more about that and move on to the second bit of the report, but just to say that the guidance that we've been producing has tried to be as cognizant as possible of the differences across the devolved nations, but also has been emerging from the bad practice that we've been collating from branches on the ground to really demonstrate the lack of a clear national strategy, or not developed rather, by the government over the summer. So in terms of Fund the Future, we are having to kind of revamp quite a lot of what we have on that website, particularly because this is still a defending jobs campaign. We still don't know what will happen with funding if refunds are given, but funding isn't then, or loss of income isn't then channeled into universities. We know that there have been redundancy programmes launched, particularly I think in some post-92, since the A-level fiasco and predator institutions were able to hoover up students. So the real key driver of the Fund the Future campaign in HE does remain about jobs and funding. In FE, we will have, as you'll have seen, if you're on FEC, in England at least, launching the pay claim. We've got an event in mind in a week on Monday to push that forward and to really kind of reinvigorate our key asks for FE, and to push back again on the sort of culture war skills agenda of this government, that means that we don't have arts and humanities, or their vision that we don't have arts and humanities at FE level for working class kids, because it's only important that they learn skills. And if you saw any of Boris Johnson's representations in Exeter College this week, you will have seen that real kind of patronising elitism coming through in the things that he said there, and also in his speech. So in terms of Fund the Future for both FE and HE, the sort of key asks that we're doing are be reformulated. We're doing the same with adult ed, and we're also looking at prison education, but I'll say a bit more about that as we move through the report. Hats off and bravo to Wales. Our campaigning has been most successful in the case of Wales. We have seen a decent funding package announced there, and we're really pushing the Welsh Government for more. And again, I think the devolved nation of the UK does mean that we can sometimes take examples that happens in the four nations and use it usually to try and push England along. But we obviously were not out of the woods. As I've said, particularly in HE, we're still looking at redundancies and ripple effects to local economies. We've got, again, staff working flat out in our regional and national devolved offices, pushing back on those particular circumstances. We've got a number of either live disputes or branches about to declare disputes, and maybe even moving towards ballot, particularly in HE, but this exists in FE as well. And again, I'll say a bit about that later. But what we've been doing for branches to push back, and you'll see the guidance that's available, is to very much centre challenging institutions' arguments about their finances. A huge part of the Fund the Future campaign was to make the kind of education that Andrew McGettigan was traditionally giving, just a sort of specialised help for HE branches, is to make that available to everybody. The webinar that he gave has been one of the most watched that we've done. We had amazing feedback on it. It remains there as a resource. If you or individuals or branches in your region know that they need to challenge their institution's finances, please direct them immediately to that webinar. Direct them to the guidance that's on the Fund the Future website, which talks a branch through exactly how they should defend jobs, particularly of casualised members in this environment. Part of that is to challenge the financial argument that's put forward by institutions, but part of it is also to fundamentally challenge the premise that precarious staff are disposable and that securely employed staff should just absorb their workload. There's a whole range of things that were developed with the bargaining and negotiation team, which I think are excellent. Steps of solidarity, ways in which you can demonstrate that secure staff are not going to take this work on. We've done a lot of national coverage regarding the extent to which institutions, both at FE but particularly at HE, move to cut precarious staff. I was really happy to see some strong motions about it at the special sector this week. But you really need to get branches looking, engaging with that material if they're coming to you as NEC members. Obviously, our regional and national officials direct them to it as well, but I think it's just really good if we all know those resources are there. There was a hell of a lot of work done by staff and by activists over the summer to put these events on. It's really our job to make sure that they don't just sort of sit there as a resource that's unused, because, you know, the way in which the attacks work in our sectors is that, you know, there's always a new branch that needs that assistance. So we're very much saying that employers should be working as hard as possible to make savings in other parts, before even casting their eye at our staff budget, and the educational materials that we've made available should help branches. Also, there's been, you know, a huge kind of student and public facing dimension to this campaign. And I think, you know, the polling that we've done recently that demonstrates that all voters of all political stripes really want and care about post-16 education. They really want it protecting. Again, I think some of this over the summer, it's not always obvious that it's going to bear fruit, but it really is now. You know, I think the very idea that a general secretary would get invited onto a programme like This Morning, which is what happened at the beginning of this week. It has 1 million viewers. I would say it verges into kind of right-wing populism upon time. and got a really easy ride. You know, people were really concerned about their family, their family member, students in accommodation, what that means for the A-level leavers. You know, there was a real appreciation of what we are doing, translating to the general public in that sense. So I think, you know, bravo to everybody who's been working really hard in your local region or nation, because it's cutting through, I would say, the hard work we've all been doing. As I say, since the launch of the campaign, the picture has changed. There still remains a lot of unknowns across all of our sectors. And we, as I say, we're really adapting our policy asks at this moment. We're getting a better idea at HE what student recruitment might be looking like going forward, but there's still a high level of volatility in that system. We've also been having lots of meetings with the Minister for Universities about these issues, but I've also been speaking extensively with the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills, and really stressing the importance of FE and adult ed in any post-19 recovery. We're continuing to push the Secretary of State for commitments to all aspects of post-16 education, particularly as our campaign evolves. But I think we're really going to be pushing and being on the front foot about that as we go into this pay campaign that's going to be launching a week on Monday with that online event. I'm very lucky that the president-elect for FE, Janet, has agreed to do a kind of an online virtual ballot tour with me for FE, like we did with the HE ballots. We've also moving into a period where we're going to be campaigning hard in Northern Ireland over FE as well, and I'll come back to that shortly. And then in the section 2 of the report, you can see that there's just some sort of media coverage that we've also had. It's unclear at the minute, but unless I get bumped, and these things do tend to happen, we might also, or I might also be one of the speakers on Question Time next week. So that will be interesting if that happens. In terms of industrial update, I've already mentioned some of these things, but I'll just flag them again. The 10 steps to help protect securely employed colleagues are really important. If in your institution this is a concern right now, I would ask that you look at them. They really seek to embed the principles of really organising, self-organising to support precariously employed colleagues. They also include a lot of social media activities that you can use. For any of you that are involved in the strike school, you'll know just how important actually getting people involved in mini campaigns can be, to then getting them involved in big campaigns and showing them that actually they have agency within their organisation. So these aren't just sort of like gimmicky stuff. These are really quite important actually in building communities and creating noise, so that when you go into the negotiating room with your employer, they know that you've got an army of people behind you. As I've said, we have a pay campaign in FE. We're starting in England shortly, and it's to address the 30% pay cut that we've seen since 2009. We're really arguing that in times of recession and in times of COVID, everyone who's been left behind should be a key concern for this government, and that there will be undoubtedly, and I think the government have even acknowledged this with their reports this week, there'll be a much larger underdeployed workforce, young, old. There's a real moment here to stress the importance of adult education, the funding that's required, and that we really need the government to invest in this. So I think the profile raising that this union has been the credible voice, the voice that cares about the sector when it's been abandoned by its leaders, is key and crucial and really important. Just a word about Northern Ireland. For those of you who aren't aware, there has been an incredibly serious attack on the FE national contract by employers in Northern Ireland. It has a longer history than I'm probably able to go into here, but it's essentially about undermining the existing rights of staff in Northern Ireland. It involves proposals to reduce the union's negotiation ability there, remove a cap on weekly contract time, slash part-time pay, undermine the profession, and really decouple the lecturers from teachers. It's absolutely atrocious. I've been on the phone to Catherine, who's our official over there. We've been formulating a plan of support that's going to come from my office. And if we don't get what we need just through campaigning, we're talking through how we're going to move to ballot over there. So it's just a flag that that's another kind of key FE issue in addition to the FE pay claim in England that we're on top of. With reference to our prison members, we are in the process right now of commissioning a piece of research because what we need to do for prison members is going to become quite serious and quite significant in the next coming months. We are really in the process of building what would be a member-led alternative model for prison education that overcomes the current market-led model. So the research that we've commissioned is going to be quite central in helping us frame that and really demonstrate that the life chances of prisoners and the status and conditions of the staff who work to deliver education in prisons should be just as central in everybody's minds as it currently is about 18-year-olds locked up in halls of residence in Manchester. So again, I do see the attention that we're getting primarily through a HE campaign as a union. I don't see it as a zero-sum game. I actually see it as being fundamentally important to raising our profile for when we actually make campaigns about any of these issues. So what we're doing with our prison members is really building an overarching proposal for the reform of commissioning that will include public ownership and really along the same lines of what we've seen agreed in probation. So we feel that if we kind of go in quite hard, there's potentially a space there where that's already been a national strategy in probation. And we're linking up with our comrades in other unions, in other kind of charitable sector groups to really make sure that when we launch that campaign, there's a real renewed focus on health and safety and well-being. For those of you who don't know, during lockdown in some of the worst resourced prisons, inmates were locked up for 23 hours a day. There's no in-cell technology there for them to access online learning, no technology there for them to have called loved ones at home. Absolutely abysmal, awful, disgraceful way for any to be treated. And we really want to make those realities apparent to people. Training and organising, we have been incredibly busy on this front. We have obviously our formal and accredited training has been moved online, and many of our courses have been running that way for a while now. In addition to our normal training, we've also partnered up with Jane McAlevey, who, as you know, is an internationally renowned union organiser, for a 6-part strike school, which is already underway and runs this month and next month. And it's a sequel to the course which Jane ran for a number of unions, including the NEU this year. The NEU, we chatted with quite a lot before we launched the course, and they said that it's paid immense dividends already for them in their ability to organise, recruit and mobilise members on a large scale. And I think you can see that that really worked for them during lockdown with their fight back against bringing schools back. So what we're seeing with them is that the kind of cohorts that they've put through their organising school and Jane Strike School have worked. As you know, they grew their membership a lot. And I think that we will see good things as well. We've had nearly just under 400 UCU members across all our sectors who registered from the Strike School, and around 20 UCU staff from our regional and national offices. UCU has signed up a higher proportion of our overall membership than any other organisation in the UK or beyond. And I'm incredibly smug about that and proud. I'm really, really happy. And our Reps Once course continues to be oversubscribed as well. So I think what we're seeing is a real appetite for members to learn new methods about organising, that we're really trying to grow our membership's capacity to bargain in workplaces. The UCU delegation, just to put it in context to Strike School, amounts to 10% of the programme as a whole. That's huge. And given the strength of our commitment to the course, we really do expect to be able to work closely with Jane to help tailor future courses, perhaps even more closely to our needs. So if you're on that school, I know the school itself is collecting feedback, but give it to us as well, because I think that Jane already did a taster event with us, which involved Cambridge UCU, who were talking particularly about casualisation. And I think it would be great to do more kind of in conversation. I'm just going to fast forward through 6, because we're going to return to that after the break, and just cover 7 and 8, which shouldn't really take too long, and then I'll come on to the pre-submitted questions before taking more. Legal campaigning. I mentioned previously that we have recruited a new head of legal, Julia Maguire, who I think is excellent. And if you have seen the health and safety template letters that as branches we were asking to assist individuals with, that was just one of the many things that Julia has been busy on since she started. But we are also looking to support casualised members through some legal work. So I met with the anti-casualisation committee about this, and I've already had some really helpful feedback actually from 1 or 2 members from that committee. But what we're looking to do is really build a precedent-setting action regarding the abuse of fixed-term contracts, particularly where staff with protected characteristics are concerned. So it's speculative at the minute, and we're basically gathering potential individuals that we may or may not choose to use who fulfil the criteria that we think will be best suited to a legal challenge. But I just wanted to update you that that's one of the things that we are doing. In terms of resources, just to sort of top and tail this report, I guess, to end where I began, my number 1 priority for the staff of this union is to make sure that everybody stays safe during this period. We locked down Carlo Street before government instructions let us knew that was coming. Actually, one of the last meetings that happened in Carlo Street was an NEC. If you remember, people had to come to the front to speak because we were already saying we didn't want to pass microphones around. Maybe hindsight suggests we could have done that meeting differently, but we are where we are. We have constantly been reviewing whether or not we should reopen our offices, constantly putting the timetable back of opening them. Unlike vice chancellors, I don't want to be the general secretary that opens a uni, opens their workplace and everybody gets ill. So on that basis, we've always been keeping the Carlo Street office for 1 day per week because we need to for access to the building. But we won't be reopening the building for the remainder of this calendar year. And obviously that's something we're going to be revisiting. I'm very mindful that our staff are, just like everybody that we represent, overworked at the minute, probably burning out. I know a lot of us in this room are, have children at home, have all of the other challenges that go along with lockdown. So there's no plan to immediately reopen the building in the future. And I imagine working patterns will continue to look quite different to what they've been for a while, even after the pandemic is over, quite whenever that will be. So that's the end of my official report. What I'm going to